Hello, Monday, Wednesday, CalmWin students. And believe it or not, I got sick this weekend and I didn't want to get anybody else sick, so I'm going to stay home one more day. I'm going to try to get through this lecture so that at least you guys are caught up to date with what we're doing. There's two lectures I need to cover. I'm going to do them in two separate videos and assign your homework. So let's get started. I want to talk about communication models, and when the communication program broke off from the English department way back in the 1930s, we actually felt we needed to be legitimate by having a communication model. And this is kind of how it went. There you are, you have a message you want to send to me, and we went, ta-da, and that was the communication model. And we actually called this the linear model of communication. I'm not going to tell you all my funny stories today because I can barely speak. But linear model of communication is the idea that communication goes from one point to the other without any reason for it to come back. So some examples of this type of communication are speeches, military orders, or the television. You could certainly yell back at the TV, but it's not going to hear you. So the idea is that communication only traveled in one direction. Many years later, communication scholars got together and said we really need something better than that. So they came up with what we call the second communication model. And in the second communication model, they said, there you are, and you have a message you want to send to me. And they said, so you send it to me, and then I reciprocate, and I send back. And they said, ta-da, and here is the interactive model of communication. The idea being that communication is something that you take turns at. My turn, your turn, my turn, your turn. Now we know that there's a lot of times when the communication actually overlaps, but this is one way to kind of model certain forms of communication. In the interactive communication model, the idea would be, again, only one person has a turn at a time. So some examples of where that occurs would be like in a debate where you have your set number of minutes to talk and someone's not allowed to talk over you. Or the use of walkie-talkies. When you have a walkie-talkie, you have to push the button, and that's your turn to talk. And you will not hear the other person unless you let go of the button. And text messages is also a really good example. Question and answer, job interviews. The idea that only one person has the floor at a time. So several years go by and communication scholars again say, well, there's all this overlapping communication. How can we possibly include that? And they came up with what we call the transactional communication model. And so this is kind of how it works. So you have, there you are, and you have something you want to say to me, and you'll notice that you're not alone. You've got baggage, right? You've got your own little suitcase with you. And there I am looking much better than I am right now, thin and a bit Asian, but also with my baggage. Now you'll notice that the two individuals look completely different, but they also have different types of suitcases. I wanted that on purpose because I wanted you to recognize that that baggage contains all the experiences that we've ever had, and so they look different. And of course, the message needs to travel. Now, how the message travels from one person to the other makes a difference. It changes the communication. You could say something, you could whisper it, you could yell it, you could put it in a text message, you could write it in an email, you could handwrite it in a note, you could give it to somebody else to get it to the person. All of those ways of getting the communication from one person to the other can drastically change the message and how it's received. So for the purposes of your notes, this is the sender and this is the receiver. Communication scholars now will claim that you're never just a sender or never just a receiver. You are a communicator. But for the purposes of your note, the sender will have to encode the message. Encoding the message means going back and looking through my baggage to decide, how should I phrase it? What kinds of words should I use? What sort of channel should I use in order to get the message the way that I want it to the person that I'm sending it to? The receiver on the other end has to decode the message. So they got to figure out, what does this mean? Based on the tone, based on the way that it came to them, what does it mean? And they're going to go back through their baggage in order to figure it out. Now, another thing I want you to have in your notes is this idea of environment. Environment is where the communication takes place. Now, if we're in a classroom, the environment is SOC 36. That's the classroom. But there's a huge difference between what happens in the front row versus the back row, on the side by the window, closer to the door. Even though we're in the same room, we're really not in the same environment. And that becomes important because people are going to take away different things from the communicative elements. If you're in class and I do a lecture and you guys leave and somebody walks up to you and says, well, what did Mrs. C talk about today? Chances are you're going to have different answers. Now let's get back to that noise element. What does this noise mean? Well, there's both internal and external noises. Internal noises are what's going on in your head. What are you thinking? Like, oh, gee, I'm starving. I'm so glad she canceled class today. Or, oh, I got that text message from my friend. I wonder what they meant by that. Those are all those psychological things that are going through your head, and you're not necessarily thinking about the content of the conversation, but those are things going on in your head, and that interferes with the communication. Then there's the external noises. These are the things that happen in the classroom, that we're all in the same environment, but those external noises, even though they're external and everybody might be able to hear them, doesn't mean that we're all going to have the same perception of what they mean. So if you hear a car alarm go off, it might mean nothing to you at all. You could completely ignore it. Somebody else could have a car alarm and say, whoa, that could be my car. Somebody else could be just totally annoyed by the car alarm. So there's lots of different reactions that we have to external noises. Again, some of the people in the class might have not even paid attention to it. So this kind of tells us a little bit about the communication models. I wanted to make sure you had this in your notes. And I'm going to go ahead and end this one so I can breathe again. And then I'm going to go ahead and start the next video.